These people had crazy ideas, but they actually worked. In 2005, JetBlue Flight 292 took off from California. It was a routine flight that was supposed to go to JFK Airport in New York, but minutes after takeoff, the crew would realize something horrifying. The landing gear would not retract back into the plane, and on top of that, the nose wheel had rotated sideways, meaning there was no way to bring the plane down without crashing it. The entire crew began to panic, except for the captain, Scott Burke. Scott knew that because of the fuel in the plane, it was way too heavy to land, meaning that if he tried any landing maneuver, all 140 passengers and 6 crew members would lose their lives. So instead, he chose to fly around in circles for 2 hours, burning fuel and reducing the plane's weight. Once the fuel tank was nearly completely empty, Captain Burke began his descent, slowly lowering the plane down to the ground, in order to attempt an extremely risky, never-done-before landing maneuver. At the time, CNN was covering this incident live on TV. Many experts were calling in saying that there was no way the plane could land, and that all 146 people on board were about to die. To make matters worse, every seat on the JetBlue plane had access to CNN, meaning all of the passengers in the plane were watching this in real time, listening to experts discuss all of the ways they would likely lose their lives. Passengers began crying uncontrollably, realizing they were watching what would likely be their final moments live on TV. But despite all the chaos going on in the plane, Captain Burke kept his cool and began landing the plane. In order to keep the nose gear off the ground as long as possible, reverse thrust was not used to slow the plane, meaning the plane landed at incredibly high speeds. Eventually, the front tires did touch the ground. In theory, they should have ripped right off from the force. Captain Burke's perfect technique made it so the plane was just going slow enough. By the time the plane stopped, the metal wheel had been shaved down halfway. But amazingly, everyone on board survived without a single injury, all thanks to Captain Scott Burke's genius idea that all of the experts on CNN said was insane. Another person who everyone called crazy is this man from the UK. Meet Dunstan Lowe. In 2011, he bought a £500,000 mansion. The mansion was old, but Dunstan loved it, so he spent a further £150,000 on renovations, adding new bathrooms, kitchens, and even a cinema room. But soon after moving in, Dunstan's business collapsed, and he could no longer afford to keep up payments on the mansion. Fearing repossession, he decided to sell the house, but no one wanted to buy it. He listed the mansion for £1 million, before dropping the price to $800,000, and then to $500,000, meaning that he would have made a loss. But despite all this, no one wanted to buy it. That was when Dunstan realized lots of people would want to own his house. They just couldn't afford it, so he came up with a crazy plan. Despite everyone telling him not to, Dunstan decided to make a raffle for his home. He would sell tickets for just £2. At the end, a ticket would be picked at random, and that person would own the house. Of course, this came with huge risk, as he would need to sell around 300,000 tickets just to break even. But just 24 hours after posting the raffle online, more than 1,500 people from as far as China, Russia, and Africa had bought tickets. By the end of the raffle, Dunstan had sold £1 million worth of tickets, and even donated 25,000 of that to charity. The winner was a woman named Marie Seger, who won this house for just £2. Thanks to the raffle, Dunstan cleared his mortgage and debts, bought a new house, and even had profit left over, despite all of his friends calling him crazy for the idea. An even crazier money-saving idea took place in 2010. The Air Force Research Laboratory had a big problem. They wanted their own supercomputer, but the government had given them a very low budget, meaning they had nowhere near enough money to buy one. That was when one of the researchers had a crazy idea. Instead of buying one supercomputer, buy 1,760 PlayStation 3 units. He didn't just want a game. Instead, the researchers linked all of the PlayStations together. The combined processing power of all of the consoles meant it rivaled supercomputers. The researchers paid around $600,000 for the consoles, whereas a supercomputer would have cost $100 to $400 million. The wild part is, their DIY PS3 supercomputer actually surpassed the capabilities of a normal supercomputer. It was also much easier to repair, because there were so many PS3 parts on the market. If one of the units broke, they could just buy another one, and if they got bored, they could even use one to play a round of Call of Duty. An even even crazier government idea took place in California. You see, California had a big problem. They were experiencing massive droughts, which were going to cause the Ivanhoe Reservoir to dry up. To prevent this, someone had a wild idea: dump millions of black balls into the water. It sounds like pollution, but really it's genius. You see, the black balls cover the water and block sunlight. This means the water stays cool and won't evaporate. It also made the reservoir cleaner, preventing algae and bacteria that would have formed if the sunlight reacted with the chlorine in the water. It's basically like putting a giant black lid on the reservoir. The balls can stay on the reservoir for years and can be cleaned and reused if needed. Since then, dams around the USA have done the same thing, despite people calling it crazy when the idea was first pitched. An even wilder nature idea took place back in 1998. Costa Rica had a big problem. There was a large patch of land that was basically dead. Nothing would grow and the soil was basically lifeless. And in turn, this meant all of the animals had either died or left. The government, scientists, and conservationists wanted to restore it, but no matter what they tried, the land stayed barren. One day, a juice company named Del Oro heard about this. Del Oro also had a problem. Because of their juice production, they had millions of orange peels piling up, leading to mountains of rotting peels they couldn't dump anywhere. It was waste, but it was full of nutrients. So they tried a wild idea. What if they dumped their millions of orange peels onto the barren land? It sounded crazy, maybe even like a disaster waiting to happen, but they tried it anyway, and then waited for 16 long years. Fast forward to now, and that once dead land is now a lush, thriving forest, full of trees, shrubs, and wildlife. The waste everyone thought was useless kicked off a remarkable nature comeback, solving two problems at the same time. An even more insane idea came from this Brazilian billionaire. In 2013, Chiquinho Scarpa shocked and angered many people. He announced he was going to bury his $500,000 Bentley car in order for him to use it in the afterlife. People on the internet began angrily attacking him, saying that he could have given the car to charity, but Chiquinho said he had been influenced by the Egyptian pharaohs, who were buried with their most valued possessions. Everyone called him wasteful and insane, but despite all of this, he went ahead with the burial ceremony. But no one could have expected what Chiquinho would do next. Right before his car was about to be buried, he yelled, "Stop." It turned out he had never planned to actually bury his car, and the entire thing was a big stunt in order to raise awareness for National Organ Donation Week. In a speech, Chiquinho called people wasteful and hypocritical. People had criticized him for burying his car when they weren't even organ donors like he was. He said organs are way more valuable than cars, and that millions of lives could be saved if everyone signed up to become an organ donor. Yet most people are buried with perfectly good organs. Incredibly, Chiquinho's stunt had worked. Within just 1 month, organ donor registrations in Brazil went up by 30%. So while people got very angry at Chiquinho at first, his wild idea actually ended up saving many lives. Some ideas look dangerous, but they're actually genius. That's the case of this farmer's idea. He had a major problem. Weeds were infecting his crops, but he didn't want to contaminate his land with pesticides. So instead, he thought, why not just burn the weeds? Doing so by making a flamethrower tractor. This is a process called flame weeding. It's faster and safer than pesticides, and also kills the weed seed near the surface of the soil. It might look like a vehicle from Mad Max, but the idea is genius, sustainable, and just the right amount of crazy, allowing the farmer to kill thousands of weeds in one fell swoop. Another crazy farming idea took place in 2020. China was about to face a major problem. A swarm of 400 billion locusts were flying straight to China's border. Locust swarms had already destroyed crops in Africa and South Asia, leading to hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. Realizing they were next, China knew they had to act, so came up with an insane idea: enlist millions of ducks to eat the locusts. A duck can eat an average of 200 locusts per day. So the millions of ducks were deployed to China's border and were able to ward off the locusts in an epic battle. We all know China's army is big, but it seems like their duck army is even bigger. An even crazier idea took place back in 1987. Mike Hayes was an 18-year-old freshman attending the University of Illinois, but Mike had a big problem. He was flat broke and had no way to get the $28,000 he needed to attend university for 4 years. But that was when he had a genius idea. What if 2.8 million people gave him 1 penny? All he had to do is somehow ask 2.8 million people. But this was back in 1987 when the internet did not exist. So instead, Mike tracked down a newspaper columnist. He knew that millions of people read this newspaper every day, so he asked one of the writers writers to put his request in their column, and surprisingly, the newspaper writer agreed. Within a few weeks, Mike had received 90,000 letters and 2.9 million pennies. Mike was able to pay off his college bills, and even paid the leftover money forward, giving it to another college student who also couldn't afford tuition. No one thought Mike's crazy idea would work, but today crowdfunding is insanely popular, so Mike was just way ahead of the curve. But sometimes being ahead of the curve is painful. That was the case for Kotoku Wamura. In 1967, this Japanese mayor constructed a massive seawall, costing over 3.5 billion yen, and taking over a decade to complete. Many said the idea was dumb and expensive, as the town of Fudai had never flooded even once. Kotoku lost his job as mayor, and for decades he was mocked. He passed away in 1998, as political adversaries mocked him and his project. But in 2011, Kotoku was vindicated. An earthquake caused a gigantic tsunami that destroyed many Japanese towns, but not Fudai. The town was in the tsunami's path, but Kotoku's seawall worked, blocking the tsunami from destroying the town. No buildings suffered any major damage, and no one in the village passed away, while a nearby town which was considered safer totally washed away. Kotoku Wamura never got to see how right he actually was, but to this day people visit his grave to pay their respects, as his idea that people mocked him for decades ended up saving his village and thousands of lives. A similar story took place in 2016 in Texas. There was massive flooding and many people evacuated, except for one man named Randy Wagner. Instead, he bought a gigantic rubber tube and positioned it around his house. His neighbors made fun of him, saying that it would never work, but Randy ignored his neighbors. Everyone's house flooded, apart from Randy's. His house was like a tiny island. His neighbors who laughed at his idea had to pay millions in repairs, but all Randy had to spend was a few $100s on a big rubber tube. But some crazy ideas don't just save human lives. Finland was having a big problem. During the winter months, it's dark 18 hours a day. That's annoying for people, but deadly for reindeer, as over 4,000 reindeer were losing their lives every year due to drivers not seeing them in the dark. So in 2014, people had a genius idea to spray the deer's antlers with reflective paint. Unsurprisingly, seeing this stopped any drivers in their tracks, saving the lives of thousands of deer. Comment below which of these crazy ideas was the most genius.